It has been 41 days since Emma Philippoff vanished from the streets of Victoria, and 41 days since her mother left her family, job, and life in Ontario behind to search for her missing daughter. The tips have slowed down, and so have the sightings, but Emma's family and police are holding out hope.
Have you ever heard the eerie sound of a missing person's last words captured on tape? It's a bone-chilling experience that stays with you long after you hear it. From cryptic messages to desperate pleas for help, these recordings offer a glimpse into the final moments of those who vanished without a trace. Join us as we delve into 15 of the creepiest recordings left behind by missing people, each one more haunting than the last. Number 15. Lars Mattank. In the early hours of July 7, 2014, a young German tourist by the name of Lars Mattank disappeared without a trace from the Bulgarian resort town of Golden Sands. It was supposed to be a fun-filled vacation with friends, but things took a dark turn when Lars got into a heated altercation with another guest and then suffered a serious ear injury. Despite his friends' attempts to calm him down, Lars became increasingly paranoid and refused to leave his room. The next day, his friends had to leave without him, but little did they know that it would be the last time they ever saw Lars again. Mysteriously, security camera footage would capture Lars leaving the hotel in a hurry without any of his luggage or belongings. But what happened to him after that remains a mystery. Did he simply run away, or did something more sinister befall him? The case of Lars Mattank's disappearance is just one of many occurrences of tourists vanishing in Bulgaria, leaving no clues or trace behind. What lurks in the shadows of this picturesque vacation destination? Are there dark forces at play, perhaps preying upon the unsuspecting traveler? One thing is for sure, the mystery of Lars Mattank's disappearance will haunt anyone who delves into it. Number 14. Tiffany Whitten. On September the 3rd of 2013, Tiffany Whitten disappeared after being caught shoplifting at a Walmart with her boyfriend. She fled, leaving behind her purse, phone, and shoes. Months went by, and her family contacted the police, but with little hope of finding her alive due to her past criminal history and the passage of time. Her boyfriend's behavior afterwards would raise suspicion, and many believe that he's the prime suspect. He was inconsistent when describing the incident and somehow acquired Tiffany's mobile device after she had vanished. He showed it to a friend of hers at 2 a.m. outside of a restaurant where she worked, but the police found no calls from his number to Tiffany, even though he had contacted several hospitals in the area. Tiffany's half-brother received a message from her after she had gone missing, and later a phone call from an app with a weird return number, which he believed was from his sister. However, the police did not examine this clue from the start of the case, and Tiffany's mother suspects it was actually the boyfriend trying to create the impression that Tiffany was still alive. Despite the police and the efforts from Tiffany's family, there have still been no answers to her disappearance. Was it an accident that would lead to her death, or perhaps she just encountered violence? The idea that Tiffany may still be alive after all these years is chilling, and the family is left with endless questions and fears about what may have happened to her. Number 13. Henry McCabe. The night of September 6, 2015 was supposed to be one of fun for Henry McCabe and his friends at a local club in Mounds View, Minnesota. However, it turned into a mystery and a sinister case that still haunts many today. After partying with his good friend William Kennedy, McCabe was then dropped off at a gas station close to his house at around 2:30 a.m. The next day, his wife Corrine received a voicemail that would shake her to her core. The voicemail was a disturbing message from McCabe, full of strange animalistic noises, screams of pain, and him claiming that he had been shot. The recording ends with a man's voice saying, "Stop it," and Corrine immediately called McCabe's brother, who then contacted the police. Despite a 3-month search and rescue operation by the police, McCabe's body was eventually found in Rush Lake in New Brighton. He had no gunshot wounds, but evidence of death by drowning was found in the autopsy. However, the circumstances that surround his disappearance and the bizarre voicemail still remain unexplained to this day, and it would be discovered that some of McCabe's friends were using encrypted cell phone numbers, and Kennedy had originally lied about where he had dropped McCabe off. The police interviewed many of his friends, but they all claimed to have no knowledge of his whereabouts. Could someone else have been involved in McCabe's disappearance and subsequent death? The case continues to be open, and McCabe's family and friends are left with endless questions and fears about what may have happened to him that night. Number 12. Trevor Deely. Picture this. It's December of 2000, and the night is cold and unforgiving. A young Trevor Deely unassumingly walks into the night, unaware that it would be the last walk he would ever take. Trevor Deely was a bank employee on his way home from an office Christmas party, and seeing as the taxi drivers were on strike, he'd have to walk back to his apartment. After all, it was just a 20-minute walk, and one that he was well familiar with. But according to the CCTV footage, on his way back to the apartment, he was met by a tall man who was dressed in all black. Then, seemingly out of thin air, a second man, also dressed in all black, appears and spoke with Trevor. And the last time that anyone saw Trevor was when he left the office for his apartment. The next morning, he was gone, having practically vanished into thin air. None of his loved ones had heard from him that weekend, and it was Monday when his employer would inform his family that he had not shown up for work. Authorities then began searching the area as Trevor's family and friends hoped to find some trace of him. But as with many cases, as the time passes, hope disappears. And as the months would go by, Trevor's case became colder than the winter night that he disappeared on. Then in 2017, an anonymous caller suggested that Trevor was actually buried in Dublin and had been killed by members of a local gang. The authorities would launch an extensive search of the area, but nothing turned up, and Trevor's case remains unsolved to this day. So the question remains, what exactly happened to Trevor Deely on that night? Was he abducted? Well, as it stands, Trevor Deely serves as a reminder that no matter who you are, you never know what's around the corner in the dead silence of the night. Number 11. Dale Kerstetter. It was just another night shift for Dale Kerstetter, a security guard and maintenance man at the Corning Glassworks plant in Bradford, Pennsylvania. But on that night, something peculiar took place. $250,000 worth of platinum pipe would go missing from the plant, and Kerstetter vanished into thin air. The investigation into Kerstetter's disappearance was deep with mystery. Authorities were stumped, as he had appeared to be an ordinary man who was well respected by his employer and loved by his family. However, a number of clues would suggest that Kerstetter did not disappear voluntarily. His pickup truck would be found in the plant parking lot with his keys still in the ignition, an empty gun holster from his .22 caliber pistol, and his day pack was left behind. The K9 unit was brought in to track his movements in the factory, and his scent was found near the valuable platinum pipe. The investigation would turn to 3 security cameras monitoring the factory around the clock. The footage then became alarming. A masked intruder was seen on the tape, and Kerstetter was observed meeting with the masked person. Later, they were seen going up to the tank area where the platinum pipe was stored. Was he the victim of a robbery, or did he orchestrate the heist himself? The mystery surrounding Kerstetter's disappearance only deepened as his family and the authorities searched for answers. The case remained unsolved, and the fate of Dale Kerstetter remains unknown. Number 10. Brandon Lawson. In the dead of night, a young man named Brandon Lawson left his home after a heated argument with his girlfriend. He then embarked upon a journey towards his father's house, but his plans were thwarted by an unexpected obstacle because he had run out of gas. Stranded on the side of the road, Brandon then made a frantic phone call to his brother, begging him to bring a gas can to his location, but this was not the end of Brandon's troubles. Only an hour later, the police would receive a frantic call from Brandon, claiming that he was in the midst of an altercation and needed urgent assistance. Shortly thereafter, a passing trucker notified authorities that Brandon's truck was parked in a dangerous location on the road. When Brandon's brother and his girlfriend arrived at the scene, they found an officer who was already present. And then something truly eerie took place. Brandon called his brother's phone, telling him that he was up the road and bleeding. But when they went to search for him, he was nowhere to be found. No trace of Brandon would ever be discovered, and to this day, nobody knows what ever became of Brandon Lawson. What dark fate befell this young man on that lonely Texas road that night? The truth may never be known. Number 9. Claudia Lawrence. In 2009, Claudia Lawrence disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a few belongings and a trail of confusion. The 35-year-old chef from the University of York was last seen walking towards her home at 3:05 p.m. on March the 18th of 2009. She called her parents later that evening and seemed to be in good spirits, but after that, no one ever heard from her again. The following day, she did not show up for her early morning shift at work, and her phone was deliberately turned off around midday. Her father would report her missing the next day, and the search for her would begin. But despite an extensive police investigation, Claudia's mobile phone and blue and gray rucksack, which contained her chef's whites, were never found. As the police investigation would be scaled down due to lack of evidence and funding, the disappearance of Claudia Lawrence remained a cold case, shrouded in mystery and fear. What actually happened to Claudia Lawrence on that fateful day in March of 2009? Her father, Peter, devoted years of his life to finding his daughter and then passed away without ever knowing what actually took place. Number 8. Brian Shaffer. It's a tale that will send shivers down the spine. A young medical student vanishes without a trace after a night out with his friends. Brian Shaffer was just 27 years old when he disappeared into thin air 17 years ago, leaving his family and friends devastated and desperate for answers. Brian and his roommate William headed out to the Ugly Tuna Saloon bar in Columbus, Ohio to unwind after a busy time of studying. But what followed was a night of terror and confusion that has haunted those involved ever since. CCTV footage would show Brian leaving the bar around 2 a.m. after being seen talking to two women, but then he was never seen again. Despite an extensive search and numerous theories, which includes the possibility that he was living under a new identity, there have been no trace of him. Credit cards, bank accounts, and even his phone, everything went completely dead. There were reports of a potential sighting of him in Tijuana, Mexico, but it was nothing more than a false alarm. With there being no clue as to what took place, Brian's disappearance is one of the most head-scratching mysteries of all time. Was he simply abducted? Did someone end his life? Or did he just disappear because he wanted to? These are all questions that will likely never be answered. What we do know is this: the disappearance of Brian Shaffer will haunt his loved ones and anyone who hears his story for many years to come. Number 7. Elaine Park. On a chilly night in January of 2017, a young woman by the name of Elaine Park would vanish without a trace. Elaine had been spending the night with her boyfriend at his home where they had watched a movie and then gone to bed. But in the wee hours of the morning, everything changed. Elaine woke up in a panic, trembling and singing strangely, all before suddenly getting dressed and leaving in a hurry. Her boyfriend had tried to calm her down and convince her to stay, but she was determined to leave. The last time that anyone saw Elaine was on security camera footage leaving her boyfriend's home in his gated community in the early hours of January the 28th. She seemed calm and collected, walking confidently to her car before driving away, but then something strange took place. Despite the short distance from his home to the gates of the entrance, there was a mysterious 9-minute time gap that would leave investigators puzzled. What took place during that time? Was there something sinister afoot? Some would speculate that Elaine might have encountered someone or something that would lead to her disappearance, and for 2 days, her family tried to contact her, but there was no response. When they contacted the police, they were then told that she was an adult and may have just run off somewhere. But Elaine's mother knew that something was amiss. Her daughter had never disappeared like this before. Finally, after 5 days, her car would be discovered abandoned on a desolate stretch of the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu, with all of her belongings inside. Her cell phone, keys, backpack, and laptop were all found in the car, but there was no sign of Elaine. The police would search the area, but no trace would ever be found of the missing woman, even to this day. Number 6. Susan Powell. It was a picturesque life in West Valley City, Utah for Susan Powell, a full-time broker at Wells Fargo, and her loving husband Josh with their 2 little boys. However, on December 6th of 2009, Susan Powell vanished without a trace, and what followed was a tale of mystery, intrigue, and horror. The last person outside the Powell family to see Susan was a neighbor who had dropped by on that fateful day, and the next morning, her children did not show up for daycare, and Susan and Josh couldn't be reached. When the daycare workers contacted Josh's mother and sister, they then notified the police, and upon arriving at the Powell home, police would find Susan's belongings, but she was nowhere to be seen. 2 fans were blowing at a wet spot on the carpet, and Josh returned home at 5 p.m. with their children claiming that they had gone camping. However, detectives found it strange that they had gone camping on a school night during freezing temperatures. Their suspicions would grow when they discovered Susan's phone in Josh's car with the SIM card removed, along with shovels, tarps, gas cans, and a generator. They also found a secret will that Susan had hidden away, stating that she actually feared for her life and believed that if she died, it might not be an accident. The evidence would continue to mount against Josh, including the discovery of blood containing Susan's DNA in their carpet and handwritten documents in her safety deposit box. What was in the box? It was her expressing extreme marital stress and the need for a paper trail for her and her children's safety. To make matters worse, their young boys, Charles and Braden, made unsettling comments about their mother's disappearance. Charles had told his teacher that his mother had come camping with them but was dead, while Braden drew a picture of 3 people in a van and told his daycare worker that Mommy was in the trunk. The final nail in the coffin was when Josh liquidated Susan's IRA, which indicated his guilt. In 2012, the case would take a turn for the worst when Josh took the life of him and his boys by setting the house on fire and locking all of the doors. Even in death, he took the truth about Susan's disappearance with him, and to this day, her whereabouts still remain a mystery. Number 5. Amber Tuccaro. The darkness had descended over the countryside as Amber Alyssa Tuccaro stepped into a car with a stranger. She was just 21 years old and had come to the city of Edmonton to explore. She left her young son with a friend and embarked on an adventure that would ultimately lead to her tragic fate. On August the 17th of 2010, Amber would go missing, and her mother reported her disappearance to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. But they did not take it seriously, brushing it off as a young woman who had been out partying. 2 years would go by and a small piece of evidence would then surface, a fragment of a phone call that Amber had made while in the car with her suspected murderer was discovered. The call revealed that the man had taken her on a rural county road instead of to the city as she had requested. Finally, the RCMP declared that they believed Amber had been murdered, but it was not until 2 more years that had passed that horseback riders stumbled upon some partial skeletal remains in a farmer's field. The remains were identified as being Amber's, and they were discovered just south of the motel where she had been staying. The strangest part was the length of the phone call, 17 minutes, but only a single minute of it would be released. The call would be made to Amber's incarcerated brother, and it's the standard practice of prison facilities to record every phone call. The exact length of the call was the same as the time it would have taken to drive her from the motel to the area where her remains were found. It was as if the call itself was a haunting premonition of what was to come. Number 4. Corey McKeague. It would be a night out that would become the talk of the town. The disappearance of a young RAF gunner who seemingly vanished into thin air. Corey McKeague was only 23 years old when he went out drinking with his friends in Bury St. Edmunds, Suffolk. However, he was thrown out of a nightclub and ended up sleeping in a shop doorway for a couple of hours. CCTV footage would capture his final moments in the early hours of September 24, 2016, as he walked into an area on a street that was used to store industrial bins. It would be the last time that anyone would ever see him alive. Despite the efforts of dozens of police officers and volunteers, as well as the review of thousands of hours of CCTV footage, no body would ever be recovered. The only clue to his whereabouts came from his mobile phone signal, which had showed that it had followed the same route as a bin lorry on the morning of his disappearance, leading to a landfill site over 25 miles away. Years would go by, and the mystery would only deepen, and then in November of 2020, it was announced that a full inquest into McKeague's death would be conducted after a request by his family. The inquest began in March of 2022, and the details that then emerged were chilling. It would be revealed that McKeague had climbed into a commercial waste bin, which was then tipped into a waste lorry. He would die early that morning as a result of compression asphyxia in association with multiple injuries. Jurors would conclude that his death was contributed to by impaired judgment due to alcohol consumption. He had likely passed out and then was crushed by the garbage when he was dumped into the garbage truck. His disappearance and subsequent death serve as a haunting reminder that sometimes the truth can be stranger than fiction and more terrifying as well. Number 3. Emma Filipoff. Emma Filipoff was a woman with a troubled past, constantly moving between jobs and living arrangements, sometimes seeking refuge in the woods. But on the night of November 28, 2012, she would vanish from the Empress Hotel in Vancouver, Canada without a trace. Hours before her disappearance was reported, police encountered Miss Filipoff outside the hotel, barefoot and disoriented. After speaking with her for 45 minutes, they would deem her to not be a threat to herself or others, and then let her go, but she was never seen or heard from again. Victoria police have received hundreds of tips over the years, but none of them have led to any concrete evidence. Even the most promising tip, in which a man named William claimed to have given Miss Filipoff a ride the morning after she was reported, led to nothing significant. William said that he had dropped her off at an intersection on Vancouver Island, 70 miles from the hotel, but police found no evidence to support his claims. Her mother had described her daughter's disappearance as staggering. She then flew to Vancouver the day that her daughter vanished, against the advice of others, and filed a missing persons report after discovering that she was not at the woman's shelter where she said she was staying. The truth remains elusive, and her mother continues the search for answers, hoping one day to find out what really happened to her beloved daughter. Number 2. Stephen Coker. Stephen Coker, a bright and ambitious journalist, had everything going for him until he vanished into thin air. He would be last seen in Henderson, Nevada on December 13th of 2009 and has never been seen or heard from since. It was just like any other day when Stephen left his car in the cul-de-sac, carrying what appeared to be a portfolio of sorts. His family thought he might be job hunting, but what happened next remains a mystery. Security cameras in the area would capture Stephen's movements as he returned to his car and then left again, but that would be the last time that anyone ever saw him. Days would go by before Stephen would be reported missing, and by then his phone had gone silent. It would be traced to a nearby cell tower, but there were no outgoing calls. The phone remained in the area for a few more days before the battery died, and it's never been located or turned on again. The case of Stephen Coker's disappearance is one of the most perplexing and unnerving in recent memory. It's a reminder that sometimes, even in broad daylight, people can vanish without a trace. Number 1. Sophia McKenna. It would be a warm summer night on May the 27th of 2018 when Sophia McKenna and her friend Spencer ventured out into the waters off the coast of Groton, Connecticut to explore the local Ledge Light Lighthouse, and then they never returned. The horror of the unknown began just 5 minutes after the video and photos were uploaded to Snapchat. Sophia's sister Michelle received 7 missed calls from Spencer's phone. No voicemails would be left, and it would later be discovered that Spencer didn't even know Michelle's number. Could it have been Sophia trying to reach out for help? The unanswered calls became the biggest mystery of this strange and terrifying ordeal. Days would go by, and no signs of Sophia or Spencer were ever found. The Coast Guard and police began an extensive search lasting up to 23 hours, but nothing would be discovered. That was until a small sailboat would be found upside down on Truman Beach, New York. Police believe that it was the boat that was used by Sophia and Spencer, but that was never confirmed. The boat was described to have growths on the hull with a light layer of dust and dirt. Unidentified fingerprints were seen in the pictures taken as evidence, but no fingerprints were ever analyzed. Then, in June of 2018, just 11 days after the disappearance, Spencer's body was found floating nearly 2.5 miles from the lighthouse, but there was no sign of Sophia. The other 2 missing boaters were also recovered, but not Sophia. The case went from the Coast Guard to the police department, and then on to Monville State Police, where it currently stands. Rumors would circulate that a gray sweatshirt similar to the one Sophia was wearing that night would be found at the lighthouse, but that was never confirmed. So what happened to her, and why did she never return? These are the questions that remain unanswered and add to the mysterious and terrifying nature of the story. That's all for today's video. If you liked it and want to see more, drop a like and consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.